So this is the second class in the course on RPH 140, which is originally was a world philosophies class, and I've recently changed it to exercising practical wisdom in our time. So I think philosophy is about the love of wisdom, and I revised the class because I think the world is changing so much that I wanted my students to read books related to this moment in time, but also through the lens of Plato and Aristotle, so they can understand that the idea of the love of wisdom and Aristotle's list of virtues are still really relevant for our time. It's just that the books they read will be related to, well, what is the world in our time? How should we think about this moment? As a college student, in 20 years, you will have to go out and lead this world. So, what have we got? And you should not be surprised by all the changes, and you should not overreact. Somebody has to lead, and it should be college educated students. All right. So, I also teach at a small liberal arts college. And so I'm starting out with a book that is about liberal arts education, and it's evidence-based. It's a social science research project, and those projects are expensive and they take a long time. But in order to get what's considered respectable information, respectable results, you have to just do it. So a study was done on liberal arts education and whether it actually did make a difference in students' lives. Like, that's the big thing. It's more expensive. It's also being threatened in the US because of the expense. And so you need to prove that it's worth the cost. So the book starts out with a brief summary of how this tradition started. It's related to the Greeks. Plato's Academy was perhaps the first liberal arts school. It's definitely the one that people who are trained in philosophy tend to start with the Greeks. But in the US, hundreds of small liberal arts institutions were founded, and they were founded by religious leaders. But they had a unique approach. Um, and it's uniquely American. It's also important as we try, right? Supposedly globalization was going to lead to more countries becoming more democratic. At this moment in 2025, democracy is in the decline and there's a rise of authoritarianism. But this is the moment when we need to bring back the model of liberal arts education and why it's valuable so that we can recover our democracies. So we know what was it about the tradition of democracy. And again, I'm going to do Greek democracy that is worth preserving or reawakening or reminding ourselves of what it's about and why it's worthwhile, even though it's expensive. So, what is it about liberal arts education? It's the content of the study is non-vocational. So you have all these required courses in science, social science, humanities. Students come to college, they have this distribution core of courses. They have different intellectual skills that they're developing. They discuss different topics. It emphasizes discussions of questions where there's not necessarily a right answer. This is definitely this class. My class is a classic liberal arts. Philosophy to me is the ultimate, the way I teach it. You have to write papers. I don't assign any tests. And then at the upper level classes, we have seminars. But I also meet with my students 4 times each semester. Every time they have a paper due, they have to come and talk to me about their outline, and we can discuss it, and I give them suggestions for how to expand it. And I tell them I'm going to treat you like an adult, like you can think, and I'm going to engage you as an equal. And you should treat yourself like you have a mind and you should use it. So we do study pedagogy a lot, and I've, refined my pedagogy over the years. Um, I have larger perspectives. There's a community. This is another thing about liberal arts is that Lyon College is a community. And so the staff, the administration, the faculty are all on board, and we interact with students a lot. I encourage them to look at the strengths and weaknesses of their views when I correct the papers. Definitely, they learn about other cultures. They have serious conversations with others who are different. So every liberal arts school tries to get students with as many different backgrounds as they can. And then they discuss things like peace, justice, human rights. And the quote from Yale is this idea that the professors and the staff really are supposed, and coaches, they're supposed to exist and loco parentis, in lieu of parents. So students leave their parents, they come to college, but they need mentors, adult mentors. Socrates is the classic mentor who was fighting against the sophists for the souls of the young people. Um, uh, Students talk to faculty outside of class, yes. The trouble is very few students are graduates of liberal arts colleges. So this video series can at least help people who are going through the class to understand liberal arts and hopefully to value it. Okay, so I will try to make you think in this liberally minded way. So what are the outcomes, right? They looked at these 6 points: living lives of consequence. Do the students go out and become leaders in their communities and organizations? Are they altruists? Are they involved in public life? Do they contribute to society? Do they keep learning and being involved in learning activities? And are they culturally involved with the arts? Do they accomplish things? Do they attain a fulfilling life? A good, they're satisfied with their life and their career. They reflect on the meaning of their life, and they are personally successful. But if you aim for just success, you're not going to get these other quality of life things. But if you aim for the whole person and the whole life, it turns out you're also successful. Okay, what's the impact? The context of the study is more important than the content. So it was important that students live on campus and they interact with each other a lot. So again, I'm doing this on video, and that's unfortunate. Anybody who might be taking this class might want to have somebody they talk to about it or take it with. All right, it doesn't have to be expensive. Research universities are expensive because it costs their equipment for the research, and the low number of classes that professors teach. So there are actually a higher percentage of lower income students go to liberal arts colleges, which is really nice. And that's partly because of Pell Grants. If you're below a certain income, the government will pay. Graduation rates are higher. So what were the results? They were 25% more likely to lead later on in life. They donate more, 25% more. 50% higher probability of donating a higher percentage of their income. Higher likelihood of volunteering. Lifelong learners, 35% more involved in cultural life, and 30% more like, okay, but if you're a business and accounting major, you're 30% less likely to be continuing learners. Social science, 36% greater. Getting advanced degrees, it's much more higher probability that you'll go on to do that. All right, so it turned out, that the results were very impressive. Then he has a longer history here about the Greeks, and this is of interest to me. I could go on and on, but we're going to talk about the Greeks anyway. All right, so the final quote I always make to my students is this Yale report of 1848, because it tells you what I think made America great, and I'm worried quite a bit about whether we are continuing this tradition. So he said, the report says Europe and everywhere else was turning toward research at that time. But the US needed a broad-based educated class of citizens. Quote, our Republican form of government renders it highly important that great numbers should enjoy the advantage of a thorough education. On the Eastern continent, that's Europe, the few who are destined to particular departments in public life may be educated for the purpose, while the mass of the people are left in comparative ignorance. But in this country, where offices are accessible to all who are qualified for them, superior intellectual attainments ought not to be confined to any description of persons. Merchants, manufacturers, and farmers, as well as professional gentlemen, take their places in our public councils. A thorough education ought therefore to be extended to all these classes. It's not sufficient that they be men of sound judgment, who can decide correctly and give a silent vote on great national questions. Their influence on the minds of others is needed, an influence to be produced by extent of knowledge and the force of eloquence. So this is really important. And I hope I teach Lyon College is a school that has won awards related to social impact, because a lot of our students do come from poor or low level economics. We have a lot of Pell Grant students. We have had a lot of first generation college students. Recently, we're getting more second generation. Okay, and that's fine. I've been teaching here almost 30 years. So it's a whole generational difference. I had some students whose parents had me for a teacher. So that's exciting. It's kind of a community that way. So that's the first point I want to make, is about America is a liberal arts place. Here's another chapter I have them read. What is college for? And this is, it comes from the book Excellent Sheep by William Dershowitz. It was a very widely read book for a number of years. He taught at Yale. He said his whole career after high school was at very sophisticated colleges. And there is a lot of evidence out that those schools have fewer and fewer humanities majors. I mean, really, really few. I think 10% all together with all the majors, 3% English majors, and a huge percent from Harvard, from these Ivy League schools, are finance majors. And it's just, we're really losing it. But Mr. Dershowitz took a sabbatical to St. Olaf College in Minnesota, and he said you could get a better education here. You could get a real education here. Whereas the students in the other schools are just competing with each other. They want status and money rather than the real liberal experience. So this is his description of what you should get in liberal arts. And again, I want my students to know this because they're they aren't familiar with this tradition. I myself spent my entire career in small liberal arts institutions. First 2 years of college, one, second 2 years of college, a different one. Graduate school, it's all my master's and my PhD were at a small liberal arts college. I taught 1 year in a community college and then another small liberal arts college for 7 years, another small liberal arts college for 5 years, and then Lyon College for 29 years. So I've had a broad experience with a lot of different liberal arts schools. I also taught at Asia University for Women in Chittagong, Bangladesh, which was also a small liberal arts college. I taught during the summer at the Anglo-American College University in Prague. That was a small liberal arts college. I taught at the State University of New York Empire State branch in Prague, and that was a small liberal arts context, another summer. So I've had a lot of experience. I taught in Indonesia at an Islamic State University, two different ones. And these were universities, but my classes were small and I had a chance to interact with students. But it was less so than it is in small liberal arts colleges. So I'm hoping to have a lot more experiences, but time will tell. So what's the return? It's not necessarily salary per se, it's just a quality of life, your inner life. You have independence of mind. You have a free mind. You can think outside the box. There's no boxes. You just freely reflect. And then my class is designed this way. Become self-aware, finding your own path in life, finding what you feel called to do. This is really important. The Greeks have this idea of living for the sake of something greater than yourself. You have to figure out what that is, or you won't be happy. You enjoy your own company. You're at peace with yourself. You can examine your choices, your relationships, and you can self-correct. You can educate yourself. Too many students, he says, go to college without knowing why. And yeah, Lyon has a lot of students like that. Now, most education is the way society transmits its values. It's propaganda. How has your mind been molded to fit society's values? You have to think about this. Is that what you want for yourself? Will that work as you move forward into adult life? He says you have to unlearn everything you thought you knew. Society is a conspiracy to keep itself from the truth. And my big thing, this is why I changed my readings, my last year of my teaching, is that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. It's Jeffrey Sachs has a book on this, but people would agree on this. we're in this transition to a digital and green economic and cultural system. Now, does it serve you well or our society well for you to continue to indoctrinate, for us to continue to indoctrinate you with the old paradigm, which is fossil fuels forever, American domination forever, war as a solution to conflict forever, income inequality forever? Okay, as an American, America has been the hegemon for 70 years or so, but that is going to change. So now there's a disruption. And throughout my students' adult lives, there will be huge disruptions. Digital disruption, technological disruption, environmental disruption, geopolitical disruption, and a demographic disruption as people move into cities. So you should develop the habit of skepticism, doubt what you've been given, come to your own conclusions, but with the awareness that you have a limited perspective and you have to continually change in order to adapt to the changing times. What is my purpose as a teacher? I'm supposed to expose you to new ideas. I'm supposed to echo your opinions back to you, force you to be transparent about what you think. Then you have to be accountable. You have to give good arguments. You can't just think anything. You either understand why you are right about some things, or you understand why you're wrong about others, and or why you're just limited in your understanding. College is an opportunity to stand outside of the world, at a distance from the world, time to think and reflect before life begins. You have to adapt to marriage, children, your job, etc. Okay, it's really important to step back, to pull yourself away from habits and customs, meet people with totally different habits, get thrown ideas that you never heard before that will blow your mind. They will undermine what you were raised with. And so you leave college with the skills to live more responsibly, to be more alert, to become a good citizen in a democracy, and to think like a citizen. What's good for our society? Not primarily, what can I get out of this system to get rich, powerful, famous? What's in it for me? The system will break down unless people really want to think like citizens. Soul making is what you do at college. Your heart feels and your intellect reflects on what you feel, and your action is tied to your reflection. So you have good reasons to make the choices you make. You come up with new creative ways to reform our society. We are all on a pilgrimage. Finding your calling, contribute to preserving our free society. And my personal story, I'm not a hypocrite. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. It was a long journey, pilgrimage. Basically, I'm still on the pilgrimage, but it took me longer than most, I think, to figure out who I am, what I wanted, things like that. So, I do believe in that. I think it's really important. The next one is the rise and fall of Athenian democracy. So I have an outline here, and it's about Plato. And these are the things I will talk about as I show the slides. But just in general, what is a political genius? Somebody who can weave the rich and the poor together and create a stable, long-lasting middle class and enable as many citizens as possible to flourish at the highest level that they're capable of. So you have to have laws that promote the weaving together of the rich and the poor. You have to have institutions, and you have to have a public that really wants to be moderate and wants to get along. Okay, so the middle class is the biggest thing. You have to have a system to distribute wealth that ensures a stable middle class. You have to have a criminal justice system that gives everyone the opportunity for both the victims and the victimizer for a fair trial and without favoring the rich or oppressing the poor. The citizens' commitment to avoid invading other countries for wealth or just for power, the commitment to developing the art of diplomacy, the ability to create just treaties, an educational system that provides opportunity for citizens to develop their talents, and that rewards those most who show that they can think clearly about the common good. These people should be given the opportunity to rule because they'll use it to distribute power as widely as possible. Then you need an informal system of education where people come together to talk about public affairs. And Athens had the marketplace and it had the theater. So this outline has a list of all the monuments and the traditions and all that. So I am going to show you now the slides, and you can go back to that outline if you want to. All right, so I am going to, all right, let's see if I can, maybe I can't make it into a slideshow, but this is probably big enough. No. Okay. Oh dear. Let's see. How can I? It's a little bit smaller. Okay. All right. So my name is Plato, and I grew up in Athens, and I I don't consider myself a cultural bigot. You know, I didn't love Athens because it was my city-state and I was born there and I'm going to support it, right or wrong. It was just over time, as I got older, I started to realize I was really lucky to have been born in Athens because Athens really, oh my goodness, had a very amazing system. I inherited an incredible culture. And so here is what it was like. I will describe it to you. So at the whole city was organized around the Acropolis, the outcropping of a rock. And at the top was the temple to Athena. Athena is the goddess of wisdom, justice, and war, but only a just war, not any old war. So it had to be war for the right reason, conducted in the right way, avoiding excess, avoiding brutality or excesses of any sort, making sure that you take care of the problem, you minimize the conflict. All right. So she is everywhere in the city. People can look up and see the temple to Athena, and she's reminding you that the gods ask you to live wisely and to live justly and to avoid unnecessary conflict, either in your family or between other people or in Athens' relationship to other city-states. Now, the temple, the way that it's built, is that the roof of the temple follows, is the same line as the hills behind it. There are 7 hills. And the reason for that is because for the Greeks, this is natural. We have to live in cities in order to be complete human beings. We are a certain species, And we're a species that by nature desires to understand the world. Plus, we can understand patterns. We can't be completely human unless we live together in communities where we have this opportunity to take turns ruling and being ruled. Because if there's an absolute authority, somebody inherits authority, nobody else can really exercise practical wisdom. All they can do is listen to somebody else, be a slave or a servant. So at the lowest level, there's 3 levels of ways people come together. First of all, families. Bios is our biological nature. Children are born extremely prematurely. It takes maybe 15 years for them to develop into adults, and that's getting extended the more people need education to function economically. But families exist, extended families, to get those babies raised. The next level of interaction is when people came together in communities so that they could live more efficiently and securely. So they came together and they had a division of labor in the economic exchange so that our material well-being, our material needs could be met more efficiently, and also security needs, right? Protect yourself from outside aggression. But the third level, this is from Aristotle's Politics, but it's everywhere in the Greeks. The third level is for the sake of the good life, really being a complete human being. Eudaimonia, okay, eudsane. And that is the Greeks around 800 BC, they realized that we are the creature that understands patterns in a world where there are patterns. And so it's natural for us to explore the scientific questions, to find out the nature of the universe, the nature around us, our own nature, the different kinds of communities, how to develop healthier societies. What sort of society? How should society be structured so we can all cultivate our capacity to flourish, to create artistic creation, free scientific exploration, free artistic expression, citizen engagement in public life? The Athenians had an assembly that met, and the people were chosen by lot. So if you were Greek, male, and had a certain amount of property, your name went into the hopper, and it was chosen randomly. And you would sit on the assembly and vote on the issues that came up, or you would be a juror on a trial. So citizen engagement in public life. This is natural and it's necessary for us to be completely human. It's the good life. The Parthenon, that's the temple. Now, the stairs leading up to the temple are very different than a medieval cathedral because it's a different worldview. So in the Middle Ages, the cathedrals are built right in the middle of the noisy, dirty, ugly, lousy city. And you step right from all this degenerate uh, way of life, aspects of life. You step inside the cathedral, and it's like a rocket ship to heaven. It's a totally different world. And you have music, the Benedictine chants, you have incense, you have a rosary to touch, you have the sunlight coming from way on high. So you have seeing, hearing, the incense, smelling, touching the rosary, and then you have communion where you taste. So it's a complete sensory experience. But the point is to remind you, like, the whole purpose of life is your salvation after death. this is not the Greeks, okay? Instead, they said you take a small step. These steps are not very high, but they're very deep. So you're integrating your biological nature with the other capacities you have, especially the sacred capacity to rule and be ruled in turn, to run a self-sufficient, citizen-led society. So this is natural, and you gradually integrate all the other aspects of your life into this, and justice, loving justice, is the most sacred. Okay, so the temple was also built because we have a natural appreciation of proportionality, symmetry, because natural things are proportionate and symmetrical. And so we're imitating nature again. And the columns are actually built not to be in proportion, just so a human being standing at the bottom will look up and they will look proportional. So that's satisfying to your psyche. Your psyche is more in harmony with itself when you're surrounded with architectural buildings that are also in harmony, symmetrical, and beautiful. Okay, so right across from the temple is the courthouse, where this is where you take this capacity given to you by the gods, Athena, and you go across and you exercise the rule of law. So trial by jury, any sort of jury issues or legal issues, they get decided over here. And this is where you are literally doing this capacity, which makes democracy possible and also makes it the best kind of government, because it's designed to trigger the capacities of the most people at the highest level. That's why it's a better form of government. On one side of the Acropolis is a theater. So the artists, in Greek culture, the artists were the educators of humankind. Even the people who studied the nature of the universe wrote a poem about it because they wanted a person to love the universe, to honor it, respect it, to have an emotional connection with it that affected their way of life. So you don't just exploit nature, you're not afraid of nature, you don't manipulate nature, you appreciate it. And your place in the natural world and in the universe. But the tragedies are about all the ways people go wrong. So at that time, people were figuring out patterns in ways that people make mistakes. They overreact. The idea here is that we are a certain kind of animal, and we have this instinctual drive, right? That's very primitive, pleasure and fear. We have sex drive. We have a drive for hunger, thirst, sex. And we also have fear. Those are the emotions we share with the animals, says Aristotle. And so the purpose of the poet's stories are to try ultimately to educate people by getting them to assimilate those drives. And they do it by telling stories about people who did not. People who they overreacted, they acted on really primitive drives, and they created a whole lot of damage. They did a whole lot of harm to their families and their societies for a generation, right? So we have all these stories of people overreacting, and the god of the theater, Dionysus, is the only god that dies and is reborn. That's because you're supposed to flush that desire out of your system and be reborn. Have this much more powerful desire to create a better world. So the teaching technique was called catharsis or purgation. So purgation, the word was originally a medical word. So if you're physically sick, you take a potion, you throw up, you have diarrhea, you either go back to work in 3 days or you die. Okay. And emotionally, so at the theater, there you have emotional poisons. And the purpose of the story and going and watching it, and also going down to the taverna afterwards and talking about it, is the way you educate yourself and you educate each other. And then there's also a kind of intellectual purgation where people have the wrong opinions. And that's a kind of obstruction, right? So naturally, we have the light of the mind. We can't be completely human unless we really love wisdom. So we have opinions that block our love of wisdom. And so the catharsis there is people have these opinions that are wrong. They have reasons for doing the wrong thing. And so you got to get rid of that too. So there's 3 levels of a catharsis. There's physical, emotional, and intellectual. And this is located on the side of the Acropolis because people need to go through that purgation before they walk up to the Temple of Athena, and they're ready to make good judgments over the courthouse because that's what they did. We also had a religious festival. We had religious festivals where people came in. Everything else was stopped. Everybody's there. And there were contests in tragedies. So the tragedians competed. There was a council that chose 3 winners. Each winner wrote 3 tragedies and a satyr play, which is, you know, wild and woolly, half men, half horse chasing around nymphs, and it's all about sex and being drunk and all that. So you have 3 tragedies and everybody's just, oh, so serious. And then all of a sudden you have this blowout, fun play, right? Tragedy and comedy. So everybody watched these tragedies, and then they went down to the taverna afterwards and talk about it. Well, what'd you think of Agamemnon? Geez, horrible. It's like, no, he's wonderful. He's my hero. It's like, wait a sec. And so you start realizing people are learning different things from these stories. And so you have to try to convince people that no, that wasn't the author's lesson. It was this. No. So anyway, so they start arguing the same way the gods argue, in the same way that the characters in tragedies argue, right? So they know that, okay, this is about life, and the poet is trying to teach us about life. What are they trying to teach us? And then after they see all 12 plays, they have to vote on which tragedian wins, right? Top 3. And a lot of those tragedies would have slaves and middle class people and the privileged aristocrats. And then the people attending were all the people. And the founders of the tradition are sending a message because the fact that the citizens vote means we want you to pay attention to this. It's not just entertainment, it's education, and we want you to pay attention. And majority rules, you win. So there were stories where the slaves are actually more empathetic and have a better moral character than the aristocrats. Hint, hint, don't mistreat your slaves. They're not inhumane. They're not tools for you. And then there's the aristocrats who can create the appearance of being wise or just, And there are middle-class people who actually believe that about them, but the play shows that no, they aren't really. They're really arrogant or ignorant or any number of things. So you're not supposed to have blind obedience and respect for the privileged class. They're accountable for their mistakes and they can make mistakes. And then the middle class people, sometimes they make good judgments and sometimes they make bad judgments. So that's middle class people are supposed to take note, right? And learn. It's just trying to educate everybody at the same place, at the same time, bring the citizens together, preserve the democracy. Don't let the aristocrats walk away with it. They're corrupt. But middle class people, you can get fooled, or you can make good judgments and treat the slaves like people, among many other lessons. Then the Olympics was originally designed instead of having a military college, you had to have young men, 15 to 30, who were strong because the wars required putting on armor and, carrying it around, and you had to be physically strong. So you could send them to military school where you learn why city state right or wrong, and you can honor just the victory in war, which is what Sparta did. But the Olympics was in a way to get people physically strong, but also to try and prevent war because it was in 800 BC it was started, and it's like a mini democracy. So each city-state sent its athletes, its best athletes, to these games, different events. And so when they get there, the idea is everybody has to be treated equally, right? All the rules are made. You can't favor your city-state. If you're a judge, no bribes, no favoritism, right? Everybody comes, everybody's equally human, and then they go camp out together. So you see, people get to know each other. They make friendship bonds, and they are less likely to go to war with each other because the athletes meet other athletes their same age, and the trainers meet other trainers, and coaches meet other coaches. They compete, but they're less likely to go to war. So it was a way to promote human flourishing. They also learn how to come together, create a common body of laws. Everybody's equal under the law. So you're working on a culture that promotes human flourishing. It's not just democracy. Lots of things came out before that. Athens is sort of the epitome, but not the only thing. Lots of other stuff is going on. Then there's the temple to Hephaestus. Hephaestus, there's many stories of the Greek deities, but uh, I don't, for this class, I didn't want to go that far. I have another class. Yes, they're great. But I'll tell you this story. Hephaestus was the god of the forge. He was an artisan. And he was married to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. So when they're together, that means that your house should be created beautifully, right? It should be beautiful architecture. You should have furniture that's been crafted. Somebody's taken time to think about it, to make it beautiful. You have pots and pans, dishes that somebody has taken time on. So all the material things of life are also beautiful and thoughtful, and you don't separate the physical from the mental, from the spiritual, the love of beauty. That's when they're together. The trouble is Aphrodite is insanely attracted to Ares, the god of war. So sex and aggression, the Hollywood formula. But they come together and then they can't stand each other, and she runs back to Hephaestus. So I think that kind of describes a lot of those Hollywood couples. But anyway, okay, so this is what Hephaestus is looking down at. This is the marketplace. This is the real center sort of the heartbeat of democracy. So people come in from the rural areas to sell things, buy things at the marketplace. Athens had the best ships, fleet, because they went and traded with people. They had economic ties to all the other city-states. They'd come and sell their stuff there at Athens. Um, People would come, and after they bought their stuff, they would go over to the marketplace of ideas. There were three little temples to Zeus, the god of justice, Athena, the god of wisdom and justice, and just war, and Ares, the god of war. Okay. There was also the place where the council at the assembly had a council that met together to decide which issues are going to be voted on first, second, third. Okay. So there was the building where the council met was there, and this was the media center. They listed what was being voted on. Then there was a place where the jurors who were selected who lived in the rural area, there were some apartments where they lived. And again, there was the posting. Here are the jury trials being going on this week. So then there's an open space, and the city's telling you, we want you to come. We want you to get the information. We want you to go over here and talk to whoever is there about these issues. This is how you get educated, right? In order for citizens to take turns ruling and being ruled, they have to know about deliberation. They have to be able to make judgments about people and issues. They have to learn, well, what did the assembly decide? Did that work out, right? There has to be follow through. Like, what happened the last time when we went to war? Or who's going to speak in the assembly? Alcibiades? Don't pay attention to him, right? Or Nicaeus. Now he's the trustworthy guy, right? So you know, you just develop a whole history based on dialogue. This is an oral culture mostly, right? Um, so that's how you develop a history of learning how to think like a citizen, learning how to vote. The jury trials, you'd find out what's going on. All right, so that's the agora, and you have the temple. Athena is reminding you to be just and wise, and Hephaestus is reminding you not to make cheap things, to make things that are well crafted. Down here is the temple to Poseidon at the end of the Acropolis, the peninsula, and there's the Mediterranean Sea and the Adriatic Sea. And here is, so there are stories, there are mythological stories that make claims that a scientist would refute, right? The reason for um, thunder and lightning is not Zeus. They had a story about how Zeus became, and those were the ones that went against science. But most of the mythological stories were psychology. They're about what happens when people give in to excess emotions and what type of person gives in. Well, the type that likes being the king of the gods, right? The rulers tend to make these mistakes. This type of person tends to make those mistakes. Those are what the gods represent. So then this is often the islands was where a number of different Greeks were speculating about, well, what is the nature of the universe? They rejected, Zeus was the cause of lightning and thunder. They want to know what the real cause is. And so they had different schools of thought. Um, uh, Democritus thought atoms. Atom means the smallest thing, that all you have to do is find the smallest thing and what properties it has. And that explains, those smallest things are different. That explains why things are different. But the ultimate foundation are the tiniest little thing. And we still have that particle physicists that want to find the smallest particle. Somehow that will get us to the nature of the universe. Then there was Parmenides, who said all is one. Everything is really a part of this much larger whole. Then there was Heraclitus that said the only thing that doesn't change is the law of change. For him, fire was energy, was what drives everything. You don't step in the same river twice. Heisenberg, quantum physicist Werner Heisenberg, actually, he said he's a Heraclitean. There's Empedocles, earth, air, fire, and water. He's the recycling guy. And there was attraction and repulsion. And these four forces keep recycling into each other. They turn into each other in a way that overall preservation of mass energy. Anyway, there was a lot of different ones, and they all lived in little communities because they wanted to live in a way that would keep that intuition at foremost in their minds. So their way of life would integrate with the nature of the cosmos as they understood it. All right, so then we also had on the first island, if you go down to the Piraeus, the port, the first island is there is a temple to Aspasia, women, which was just a place women went to take care of their particular health problems, menstruation, birth, menopause, things like that. So we had this wonderful tradition of dialogue. And I thought it was great. And I thought I was really lucky to be born in Athens. But here's what happened. Okay, the Persians invaded us, and the Persians had one demigod who dressed up and didn't even look like a person and got sort of paraded around, and everybody else had to just bow to him. And so we thought they were barbarians, right? They're not educating their people. That's just barbaric and it's antiquated. We have a much more sophisticated view. We believe in people. We cultivate people. And so they got invaded and they were outnumbered 8-1, but they won. And they won the same way terrorists win. I mean, passive aggressive. They used strategy. The Persians came and they retreated so that the Persians thought, see, we're going to wipe these guys out, no problem. And they got them to go into a mountain pass, and then they just cut them off. And they could just starve or kill them, like they've got them. They've got them surrounded. Same thing happened at the bay. The big ships would come in, and then the little Greek ships would just plug it off. So they had no way to get out. They had no way to get supplies. And so eventually the Persians left, and that was a great victory. The gods are on our side. This is an affirmation of our way of life. Our gods are bigger than your gods, that kind of stuff. And then the two biggest city-states during that war, they were the two most powerful city-states, were Sparta and Athens. Sparta was the war state. The little boys went to war school, and the ultimate value of that city was that you fight bravely in battle. And if you do, you can be a general. And if you're good at that, you become a political leader. And if you're good at that, you become one of the 80-year-old wise men who make the laws and keep the culture unified. There was no immigration, no emigration, no blind obedience to your city state. Okay, that was it. All right, well, and then we started fighting. So the Athenians and the Spartans started fighting. Now, the rest of the city-states just thought, leave us out of it. We don't want anything to do with it. Kill yourself. Just keep us out of it. Well, of course, that's not what happened. They built these power blocks, right? So every other city-state had to either be with Athens or with Sparta. And there was an island named Melos that was in a pretty strategic location. And the Melians met together and decided we're not going to let either one of them come in. We're going to maintain our own city-state, and we're going to fight for it. And the Athenians come. This is Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. He talks about how they lost their democracy. They come and they tell the Melians, look, you're either for us or you're against us. We want to take you. If we don't take you, the Spartans will come and they'll get you, or the Spartans will think we're weak and they'll go after us. So are you coming or not? And the Melians said no. And the Athenians really decimated them. Killed their, potential soldiers, wiped out. I mean, really, really decimated them. And so the young people were starting to question this, like, what does that have to do with democracy? In Thucydides' story, the Athenians say, hey, sorry, realistically, might makes right. It's all about power. Let's forget all this democracy BS, all right? Okay, so what happened? How did it get corrupted? And this is what really makes me mad, right? My uncle Solon was considered the man who wrote the Athenian Constitution. He was respected as the great Athenian statesman who knew how to weave together the rich and the poor. Okay, so of course, when I saw this happening, I thought it was terrible. So how did it get corrupted? All right. Well, first of all, where did they get the money to build all these wonderful monuments, right? This big temple, uh, courthouse, theater, like, where does this money come from? Well, turns out they take the spoils of war, all right? So you should not benefit economically from your conquests. You should save that money in case you get attacked. Because when you start using it, you're going to have more wars. You're going to have wars for money and resources because you depend upon war to get the material wealth you need. This is not the thing to do. The other thing is they taxed their allies. So their allies didn't have enough money to create their own monuments and their own free and open society. And their allies did not like them and knew they were hypocrites for the most part, because they were hypocrites. Okay, so that's where they got the money. So, hey, think twice, look twice. It looks like they love democracy. Actually, they're moving toward empire building. What about here? When people start debating justice and injustice, those debates are getting corrupted. People are using Athena to justify stuff, just like happens in the tragedies. People are not valuing proportionality in war or anything else, right? With the Melians. They just out and out 100% decimating a city. That's not proportionate. That's not appropriate. That's not practical wisdom. So the courthouse. All right. So one of the things that Plato, was most concerned with was the educational system. So until, at one point, before the sophists arrived, the way people learned how to deliberate was they went into the marketplace. You could be rich or poor, anything, but you would learn how to think about public life. You would learn how to make decisions by talking to each other. So the aristocrats would be there. You could question them. They would explain to you what power they have, and they would have to justify that they have their power because they use it for the well-being of everyone, and have these conversations. And so everyone who had the privilege to vote knew how to do it. Well, what happened was some sophists come in, they're foreigners, they don't have anything at stake, whether Athens destroys itself or not. They come in and they teach the young generation of the privileged class. They have private lessons. They charge a lot of money. So all of a sudden, only the children of the rich are going to get this education. And they teach how to speak persuasively. Why? Because then you can get anything you want at the assembly, and you can do anything you want in the courts, right? Because you can manipulate the juries and manipulate the assembly. Now, the people don't know about this. They can't identify when they use logical fallacies like appeal to pity, appeal to fear, character assassination, post hoc propter hoc, all sorts of fallacies. And they've never learned this. They can't spot it. And so they get sucked into it. And that was a huge corruption of the courts, of the assembly, and, of the democracy. So now the rich can really walk away with the whole system. They can do whatever they want. So instead of freedom meaning the freedom to become informed and engaged in public life, it's the freedom to take the city wherever you want to go to get rich or powerful, whatever. So what happened in the tragedies? People started thinking that Homer fed these irrational desires, and he wasn't critical of them. He was just describing them. This is the way life is. People are like this. And it's kind of funny and kind of crazy. And so the Athenians start justifying their own irrational behavior. Instead of telling themselves, don't do that, they say, you see, that's just the way it is. People are irrational. And Homer's just telling us, yep, that's the way it is. Oh, what happened in the Olympics? Well, the Olympics was supposed to be about overall wellness, sound body, a sound mind and a sound body. It was a religious festival, right? You respected the gods, Zeus, Hera, Apollo, the god of reason, the one who makes the laws and applies the laws. Okay, so what happened? Each city-state, so they were in Olympia every 4 years, but they were in these other city-states those other 3 years. And what happened was that the athletes got so specialized that they weren't even that overall healthy. If they got off of their regimen, they wouldn't even be that healthy. And the city-states didn't really give money so that everyone would be healthy and well. They saved all their money so they could have this big bash every 4 years. And so people would come and they were couch potatoes and they were fat, whatever, lazy. But they came to the Olympics because it was a big party and they could drink and carouse around. And so the athletes were hyper trained and not that healthy, and nobody else was healthy. So the whole thing just became, it was totally corrupted from the original idea. So what happened with poor old Hephaestus? His wonderful craftsmanship now was dedicated to making swords and shields for war. What happened in the marketplace? Well, one thing that happened is they had wares from all over, right? They had the fleet going and getting commercial products or people from elsewhere coming to sell them. And instead of creating friendship bonds and economic bonds, of course, the Athenians started getting more greedy. And so people felt like the trade agreements weren't fair, but they also became moral relativists. So someone could come from another city-state where they happened to worship a different god or goddess, or they had their different religion, and they go, oh, religion's just stupid. It's all relative. So they became more relativist. So what happened with Poseidon? Um, he watched the ships go off to beat the Persians. And that was a legitimate war. That was a just war, a defensive war. But then he watched the Athenian ships go off and fight the Spartans. And that became empire building. And so it really did. It was the same city, it was the same structure, but the spirit of the city had completely changed. And now it was just used for people to be unjust. Um, so what happened as the city got less and less stable, because you have a shrinking middle class, people are questioning things, it's becoming less stable. People say we've turned against the gods. That's what's wrong. We have those heretics out there trying to think of natural causes. That actually the cause of this is the gods are angry at us. So everybody has to believe that the gods, that Zeus is the cause of thunderbolts. We don't want any of this free thinking. And so another reason the speculators were off on these islands was because they didn't want to get killed. They knew this was not popular with a lot of people. And then women's health. What other reasons did women come there? Well, because they were getting abused. It's not all wonderful science and making women's lives better for a lot of them. I'm sure it was just a haven to come. So what happened to the dialogues, right? All these dialogues about why we should love wisdom turned into, right? Why we should keep pursuing our empire and making the world safe for democracy and all that wonderful stuff. So what happened was Socrates, my teacher, or old man, he was a stone cutter. And every time he wasn't working, or out at war or whatever, he would come to the agora and he would ask questions. Anybody who was there. There could be people or prominent people or uh, shoemakers or anybody. And he'd just say, what is justice? If it was somebody that had a position of authority, he would ask them the question related to that position. Like he asked the military generals, what is courage? Obviously, a general should know that. The trouble was these people really couldn't answer them. They either didn't have the knowledge or they were corrupt. It became obvious they were either corrupt, they were using the power that the public entrusted them with to just get rich and powerful and famous, reputations for themselves, or they just didn't know what they were doing and they shouldn't be in the position in the first place. So Socrates exposed this, and Socrates thought, well, that's what every citizen is supposed to be doing. And I'm the best citizen because I'm trying to hold people accountable, and we can't have our democracy unless people are ruling for the benefit of the ruled. So we do need to keep talking to the rulers as well as to each other and constantly be examining ourselves and living for the sake of the common good. So he thought he was the best citizen and he's doing what everybody should do. Well, that isn't how it went across. The Athenians eventually accused him of not believing in the city's gods because he did question the religious leaders and they couldn't explain why they should have that authority, how they knew what the gods wanted. And then the corrupting the youth, because the youth whose parents were off governing, they used to follow Socrates around and watch these powerful people get humiliated. And so Socrates got blamed for it, but all he did was ask them what they think, and they couldn't answer him. Well, too bad. He got accused. So he got the hemlock, and there's some hemlock. Um, so now what do we do? When we come to Athens, we have dialogue about Athens. What has changed and what has not? And these kinds of dialogues can be anybody in the world. I've given this lecture in China, in Prague, in Indonesia, anywhere. Everybody understands. They understand what you need to have a flourishing society and how it gets corrupted. And so that's what everyone in the world needs to be deliberating and debating and holding leaders accountable. And leaders need to be careful in making sure they really do have the knowledge that they've been entrusted with, that the public has entrusted them with, that they can actually do their jobs. All these things are super important. So there's a sunset, a beautiful ideal, right? I think it's an ideal, and everybody should try to honor that in their own country. Everybody should want a truly free people in a truly free society where there is free scientific investigation and artistic expression and citizen engagement. We should all want that. Can we keep it alive? The educated people in each country and the people in every country working together, because we do have an international system at this point. So we have layers and layers of people needing to work together. So, oops, stop the share. All right. So that is my lecture. That's the second lecture. And I hope you enjoyed it. And